Pleasure to be joined now by my man, Matt Miller of Bleacher Report, somebody I think is the best in the business and somebody that I highly respect. So, Matt, welcome to the Reid Option Podcast.
Man, I've been waiting to come on this podcast for a long time. You know how highly I think of you. You're one of my favorite people in the business of journalism, not just in the draft community or the scouting community. So to have you say that is one of the best compliments I can get. I've loved watching you grow in this profession, watch your career take off. So I'm rooting for you. I know all my guys at Bleacher Report, we are too. We're all big fans of what you do. So thank you for asking me to come on today.
I appreciate it, man. It means a lot. And, when I was a younger guy, you're somebody I actually looked up to. And it's crazy seeing how much you've grown too. I think my first year I actually started to read your stuff on BR was in 2011 when Cam Newton was coming out.
Wow.
So you were a really young
Now I
scout
feel
back
old, man. I just feel old. I try to remind myself, like, I was in my 20s then, and it's like,
then.
okay,
Yeah,
well, that's not that bad. But 2011 sounds so long ago now. But you're
right.
right. Yeah, that was my first year at BR. So you've been with it for a while.
Absolutely. So let's touch on that a little bit. And I just want to talk about your background and your journey in scouting. So just talk about your start in the industry and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, I'll give you the short story because I think everybody's heard it by now. So I was a terrible high school football player. I wasn't a good player like you. I didn't play college ball, and I also my decision making on and off the field wasn't that good back in the day. So when I was a senior in high school, I had a child, a beautiful daughter who I ended up raising in large part by myself, and so I didn't take those opportunities that a lot of guys can these days, where you can pursue. You want to go be an intern, you want to grind your way through the scouting process. Well, back then that wasn't an opportunity. I graduated high school in 2001. Like we were saying, I'm an old man. So back then, it wasn't like it is now, where you knew about these opportunities. Teamwork online wasn't a thing. So I just went through this, like, how can I learn and grow every way that I possibly can? So I'm very self-taught. Like, if there was a book about scouting or coaching, I devoured it. And then I was just so dumb and naive. I don't even remember how I got the email addresses for like every general manager in the NFL, and would just email these guys and, get like 3 responses out of 32. And I was fortunate because people like Bill Polian, Michael Lombardi, Charlie Casserly were incredibly helpful. And when I was, 21, 22 years old, of like, hey, we'll, send us your scouting reports. We'll tear them apart, tell you what you're doing wrong. So that was helpful for me. Through that, when I was 17, I started writing, covering the draft, NFLDraftBlitz.com, way back in the day, covering the 49ers. And so I've been writing about the draft almost since the internet came to rural Missouri. And so through writing and trying to learn how to scout and coach, I was fortunate enough to be able to, scout for a CFL team kind of on like a $50 per report basis. I did some stuff for the AFL2 when it was a thing. I coached minor league and high school football, all the while owning and operating my own draft websites, and just was kind of trying to throw as many things at the wall, hoping something of football would stick. Meanwhile, working, I spent 2 years in a pharmacy working. I spent 2 years in an ER. I spent 5 years in marketing, just trying to like hold down day jobs so that I could continue this hobby that was a passion. And then in 2009, late 2009, I applied to Bleacher Report, and they accepted my application, and the rest is kind of history. I've been there ever since, and I'm incredibly fortunate to have got in with a company that happened to be growing in a time where, journalism has not grown that much. So I've been really fortunate. And, to a lot of people who I know listen to your podcast, I know people listen to mine, and they want to know, how do they get your start in scouting or coaching? And that's why I always tell you, like, it helps to play college football like Jordan did, but you don't have to. You can get in just through hard work. And at BR, our founder, David Finocchio, when he was with the company, I always preached that we're a meritocracy, and hard work that will rise to the top. I believe scouting or coaching, being an analyst, it's all the same. Like, if you go in and you want to bust your tail and outwork everybody and kind of come in with that underdog mentality, that was how I always attached it. And I know sometimes that can come off as like corny. It can also come off as egotistical when it's like, okay, I worked for free for a long time to get to this point, and you want to be proud of your accomplishments. So it's been a fun ride. I'm in my 10th year at Bleacher Report now, so it's crazy to look back and see that it all started skipping church to watch the NFL draft and skipping school to play Madden. And now here we are.
Right. It's always funny. Like, I was just talking to Lance Zierlein, who I'm running this series with as well, called Scouting the Scout. And he was just talking about how he got his start. And basically it was on his own, even though his dad he coached in college ranks for a long time. And he was one of those guys that he was a basketball player growing up. He wasn't a very big football player. So it's just interesting always seeing those unique backgrounds. But like I said, you're a guy I've tracked for going on 10 years now, basically all of your career. So getting to learn yourself a little bit during that decade, in a sense, what would you say is some of your biggest beliefs that you have learned to use as a scout?
Yeah, one of my big like cliche sayings is to scout the player, not the helmet, and that's one of the biggest things for me. I know early in my career, it'd be like, oh, here's another Wisconsin running back, or here's another Clemson wide receiver, and I think we still get caught in those situations now where it's like, okay, we're looking at Sean Wade. Here's another Ohio State corner. And for better or worse, you almost put guys in buckets that they don't belong in. I think C.J. Henderson got hit with some of that last year, where it's like, oh, Florida DBs don't hit. So let's ignore this guy who's really, really good, and he's not those guys. He's not Tease Tabor. He's not Quincy Wilson. Let's evaluate him in a bubble. So that's one thing that I've really tried to learn. And I think, with technology, it's gotten a lot easier to do that. Having access to 125 teams tape instead of I got to try to record things on Saturdays and watch these games back. It's much easier now to be able to break some of those stereotypes. So I think that's one big thing. I wouldn't say I was ever anti-analytics, but I didn't quite understand them well enough early in my career that I think to a point I almost pushed them away of like, I'm not going to pay attention to this stuff because I was taught to do this by using my eyes, watching a guy, keeping notes, to where now, like, I find myself looking at things, even if it's for thresholds. I always say, and I say this in our office a lot here, is that like I want all the answers to this question that I can find, whether that's watching the tape, which is still like, I believe the foundation of scouting, whether that's analytics, whether it's, GPS, advanced, like whatever it is. Like we are doing this independently. We don't have teams of scouts and doctors and psychologists. We need as many answers as we can get to cracking that code. So I think that's the other thing, is being open to not necessarily outside information, but things that I didn't know in 2011, or that I didn't know in 2018. So just trying to constantly learn. I have not made it. None of us have made it. We're all trying to get better. So that's one big thing of mine, is I want to always be smarter than I was the year before to try to eliminate some of those embarrassing mistakes that we all have on our record.
Right, and scouting the player and the helmet logo is a really good one, just because we just seen a guy that's a carbon copy of it that just signed for $500 million, and Patrick Mahomes.
Right.
He was a guy that was put into that similar bucket, and Graham Harrell and some of these other quarterbacks that came out of Texas Tech, and the stigma before we saw Baker and Kyler and Mahomes was that Big 12 quarterbacks just didn't cut it in the NFL. So I'm really glad that you said the scout the player, not the helmet logo. I think that's a really good one.
Yeah, and I mean, Mahomes and I learned a lot from him, honestly, from talking to him, but also from missing on him. And I think there are going to be people who can raise their hand and say, no, I hit on Pat. God bless you guys. I did not. And I think that a lot of it was that, Jordan, you're coming from the Big 12. I'm a Big 12 guy. Like the defenses are not good. No one had made it from like a run and shoot or that wide open spread offense to the NFL. And then, so I think even with that, like the way that I evaluate quarterbacks is changing, because I think Bucky Brooks said this really, really well. We're looking for scorers, not shooters now. It used to be you want 6'5" drop back passer, stay in the pocket, deliver the ball. Now we want Lamar Jackson, we want Kyler Murray. Like go out there and make plays. Be a guy that can affect the game in multiple levels. So I think that's one thing, is just like be willing to learn. In this industry, you're going to be wrong a lot, and people are going to remember when you're wrong more than when you're right. And so it's just be willing to learn from that and say like, yep, I missed on Pat. I was too low on Lamar. Here's what I've learned from that. So that when Kyler Murray comes along, he can be your number one quarterback, or when you see things that Joe Burrow does, you can even realize that like some of the things that Joey does or some of the things that Pat does, even though it's a different level of arm strength, it's that field vision, the poise. And so you're constantly relearning how to scout as the league changes.
Right, and that's a really good point. But I want to ask you another question that's along the same lines. And I'm sure you learned a ton since you've been in the business, but what is something or a couple of things that you have learned that you might not have necessarily known coming into the industry in 2011?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I came in, I really thought that I needed to have a much better understanding of X's and O's. And so early on in my career, I put so much emphasis on that side of things, of trying to learn from like Matt Bowen, who was a colleague of mine for a long time, trying to learn from Chris Sims and be like, I need to understand the deep levels of coverage and blocking schemes. And I used to bug Jeff Schwartz and Duke Manyweather to no end, thinking I had to know all about these blocking schemes. And then the more time I spent around general managers and directors in the NFL, I learned that like those guys have a good understanding of football, but they're not students of the X's and O's to the level that I was trying to get to. And so that was one thing for me. probably within the last 5 years, where it's like, okay, I can let go of some of this. I don't have to spend 20 hours a week breaking down coaches tape of NFL so I can stay on top of schemes and situations like that. Whereas I can spend more time looking at the athleticism of players. And I think that was one lesson to go right off that I learned as well, is like, when we're evaluating players, I'll never forget, I was lucky enough to go to a game. I won't say what game because I don't want to get anybody in trouble. I went to a game and I stood on the field with a director of college scouting for a team. And he was just like, so here's what I do. And like, I stayed with him the whole game. And so it was like from the beginning to the end. And so much of his time was spent body typing and just paying attention to athleticism. So little of his time was spent paying attention to technique or what a guy was asked to do in a scheme. And I think that rubbed off on me a lot as well, especially like I love scouting receivers. And that rubbed off on me a lot then, because it's like when I'm looking at these receivers, you can't just knock a guy because what he was or wasn't asked to do in his scheme. You have to look at what he can do. And so those would be my three big lessons, is like what to focus on, how much athleticism plays into a guy's success or miss rate, and then not getting so caught up on you did or didn't do this, but what can you do? And I think, to me, if I were to write like a Bible for scouting, that'd be the first chapter. Is like, scouting is what can this guy do, and then trying to project that into your individual needs as a team.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you gave the field level reference, just because at the time I still was a rookie at the Senior Bowl. I've only been to 2 Senior Bowls, but this was my first year actually sitting in the press box and actually watching everything. And like, I was so amazed. Like, I'm mad I didn't do that my first year there. So I was one of those guys sitting in the bleachers. It was my first year in 2018. And I was like, man, I don't know what position to look at.
Right. There's too much going on.
Yeah, it's way too much. But from the press
Right.
box, I can see the offensive lineman over here. I can see the DBs over here. So the field level references are really good one.
And that's our cheat code, man. Being in with
Yeah.
Phil Savage previously and then Jim Nagy now, we got grandfathered in. I think things will probably change now that we won't be at Lad
Yeah.
Peebles anymore. But, we had that sweet setup in the corner of the press box like no one knew about. So we'd hide out up there, and people like, you weren't even at practice. It's like, oh, no, we were. We just had Chick-fil-A and we were sitting up in the booth watching, because you get that bird's eye view. It makes everything much easier.
Right. And it's always pretty windy and kind of cold. It's been kind of cold the past few Senior Bowls as well. So
climate controlled up there.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's always something that I always love to say. But your biggest prospect hit and miss, that's something that I want to touch on. And I know you're a guy that's very prideful about your hit on Michael Thomas. So I want to exclude him a little bit from this.
Yeah.
I know he's one of your biggest hits. But just talk about somebody that was a big hit for you, and then somebody else that you learned a lot from when you missed on.
Yeah, it's tough. It honestly is. It's tough as an evaluator to talk about your hits. Like, Michael Thomas is the one that I kind of hang my hat on. Before that, it was Alshon Jeffrey, a similar deal where like you go to bat for a guy and he falls to the second round, and people doubt you because like, oh, he's a second rounder, he's not gonna be good. And then when they have success, you want to hang your hat on that. So one that's like kind of under the radar, Dylan Cole was a player that I really, really liked. He was right in my backyard at Missouri State, and I went to bat to teams, about him. It was like trying to tell my friends in the league, like, hey, this guy can actually play. He's not a combine guy. He's not going to be a Senior Bowl guy. But like, he's a really good player. And, he's not the best middle linebacker in football, but he's had a really nice career at the Houston Texans, to the point that he was named a captain. He's a high-level contributor as an undrafted free agent. And so to me, like, where I'm at in my career as a scout, I want to find those guys. Like, we all knew Nick Bosa was going to be good. That doesn't count, So you want to find those guys that are way under the radar and say, that to me is a hit. As far as misses go, like, I think my most famous one's Trent Richardson. I don't know why that got applied to me. Like, we all missed on Trent Richardson.
Yeah.
I'll take that one though. I think Mahomes is honestly, like, that's going to go down. I had a second round grade on Mahomes, and it's funny because I've shared Pat on the scouting report, and he's like, I mean, you were right, and it's just, I did not think he was ready to play. And had you told me, hey, he's going to go to Kansas City and sit behind Alex, and he's going to have that great support staff, I would have changed my mind completely. But the idea was, man, if he goes to Cleveland, or if he goes to, even Houston at the time, some of those other teams that wanted him, if he had gone to those situations, I don't know that he would be where he is right now. I think he would have got there eventually. But that's always the fear when you rank guys before you know where they're going to go, is that they get drafted into a perfect situation and it changes everything. So Mahomes is definitely one of the biggest ones that I can think of off the top of my head. I think, honestly, and you're probably going to come into this too, like, your misses, when you've been doing this a long time, even when you try to go against the league, you start to find out that, like, you're in lockstep with them. It's like Mitch Trubisky. I had ranked as the top quarterback that year, and it's tough because it's like he was the first quarterback drafted. He's the worst of the big three, obviously. So it's like it's a miss, but at the same time, you're getting so much information at some point from other evaluators of no, like teams love this guy. He's the next Andrew Luck. All this and it definitely creeps into your evaluation. So that's my goal for 2020 is to cut out the noise and really get back to just evaluating guys the way I evaluate them and let scouts talk their stuff and not let it affect my rankings.
Yeah, and I want to back up a little bit and just talk about that entire quarterback grouping as a whole. And I'll just share a little bit of my experience. I actually was a Deshaun Kaiser guy who was in that same group, and everybody had them scrambled. They had their own organization and ranking of how they were mismatched in the sense or ranked in the sense. But quarterback fit is so important, man. And excuse
Yep.
me, Deshaun Kaiser goes to Cleveland with Hugh Jackson. We know that was probably the most toxic situation that he could have ever
Mm-hmm.
been in, just because everybody know he was a super young prospect and there was no way he should have been thrown out there to be a starter, which he was his first year. But on the flip side, you talk about Pat, who couldn't have went to a better situation with Andy
Right.
Reid, who's a terrific play caller, a known quarterback developer, and then he gets to sit behind Alex in a sense and really only see action that final Week 17 game. That was the first time he really touched a field in the starting role anyway. So quarterback fit is so important, man. So just touch on that a little bit.
Oh, it's huge. And you try to tell people that and they think that you're like copping out, and so like
Yeah,
with Joe Burrow, I know Bill Polian's been quoted this week as saying that Joe Burrow is going to struggle. I don't know if he is because I don't know what kind of coach Zach Taylor is still, but I
right.
like the weapons that he has. But like Kyler going to Arizona, Kyler Murray going to Arizona, it's like, okay, yeah, this is going to work. Your
Yeah.
head coach got to handpick his type of quarterback. So it is incredibly important. And Deshaun Watson, I think a lot of folks forget that when he came in, Bill O'Brien completely changed that offense. They rolled it back and said, we're going to run what you ran at Clemson. Just go have fun, go execute, go make plays. And it's weird because like I'm a huge Texas fan. I wish we could go back in time and like put Vince Young not with Norm Challenge at Fisher. Like what
Yeah.
would that have been like? Or
Right.
even like Ryan Tannehill. Ryan Tannehill was terrible in Miami. He goes to Tennessee, turns it around. So it really shows you, just how important not only the scheme is, but the support you're getting, the coaching you're getting, the players around you. And we'll see, like Baker and Kevin Stefanski right now at Cleveland. I happen to think that's a good fit.
Yeah.
Hopefully in year 3, we finally see somebody who can, take advantage of the tools that he has.
Absolutely. So just transition to the next question. I think this is a pretty good segue for the most part. You've seen the draft industry grow so much over the past decade, and we see you on Twitter all the time. You get some people that are unpleasant on there, but as far as your evaluations, but you get some of these younger scouts that are asking you for advice all the time. And I know you can't get to every question just because you have nearly 300,000 followers, which is a monstrous amount. So just what are some advice for younger scouts that you have, maybe that you experienced or something that they may experience in the future that you can share?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is like Twitter's your resume, and so I teach scouting classes for charity, and that's what I tell everybody. If you don't put something on Twitter that you don't want your next employer to see, even if that doesn't even mean like curse words or inappropriate things. Like, don't come at Jordan Reid and tell him that he sucks because your employer is going to see that and they don't want that. So I think the draft community that I grew up in, there was a lot of mutual respect, and everybody knew like, okay, that like Mel Kiper's the guy. We all want to get there, and McShay and Daniel Jeremiah and a lot of really good people, Lance Zierlein, that are peppered in there as well. So I think that's the big thing is like be respectful, try to learn. You don't have to agree with everything that everybody says. I don't want people to always agree with me. That wouldn't be conducive to evaluating. So I just think be respectful. The other thing is like when you don't know something, you don't know something. I think social media has made it to where we all have to have an opinion on everything, and especially when it comes to football, none of us know everything, but we almost feel forced to have a take on everything that happens. So sometimes like it's okay to not know. No one expects you to be a salary cap expert, an X's and O's expert, and
Right.
an expert evaluator. Like you don't have to do that. And so that's the thing is like just know what you know and find your niche and drill down and try to be great at it.
Absolutely. Then last question, then I'll get you out of here. So we have something that's going on with the world. Obviously, the pandemic, everybody knows about it. But there was big news yesterday. Virginia Tech cornerback Caleb Farley, who was very high up on a lot of preseason big boards, he announced that he's going to be skipping the 2020 season at Virginia Tech, and he already declared his name for the 2021 NFL draft. And I think you alluded to this actually before it even came out, and this might be a trickle down effect if we see some bigger guys or big names declare themselves for the 2021 NFL draft. But As far as those big names, do you think that could affect them in the long run? And then, of course, we're also going to get some other guys who get bad advice that are declaring for the draft as well,
Yeah.
that are coming into the season as late round picks, but maybe they want to save themselves or they just don't feel healthy enough going out there. They don't want to risk spreading the virus to these other family members or bringing themselves into contact. So just shed a little bit of light on that, and then just your overall thoughts of Caleb Farley.
Yeah, I think it is tough, Jordan, because unfortunately there are going to be guys, we know you can plug any player's name into Twitter and find that they're a seventh rounder and a first rounder. And guys are always going to go with the good news. And so that is unfortunate. And that there's not, I'm not a huge fan of the draft advisory board. I don't think they do a great job. And it's a hard task because they're asked to give grades on guys in January when a lot changes. There's not one right now, so you can't find out. You're basically talking to an agent who's then talking to guys like us and to area scouts to try to figure out where guys are going to go. So it's not ideal. Now, I do think Caleb Farley's the first. I don't think he's the last. I think we'll see other guys who, are probably in that first round conversation or top 50 conversation, but are also not on a team that's competing for a national championship. And so when I got tipped off that like, hey, a big name corner is going to declare, I text my editors and was like, it's probably Caleb Farley, but we're not going to run with it because it's his story to tell. But you can figure it out. Like, okay, Vatek's like it's a good team and not a great team. He is, for a lot of people, the number one corner. It's probably going to be him. It's not going to be Sean Wade because Ohio State has a pretty good chance. So I do think we could see other guys like that. What's stopping Micah Parsons? Penn State's a good team, but can they get past Ohio State? Maybe not. What's stopping Micah Parsons from saying, I've done all I've needed to do? Or if Jamar Chase isn't sold on the new quarterback at LSU and says, I lost everybody around me. I have nothing left to prove. I don't want to put myself at risk. And, with Caleb Farley, we saw, unfortunately he lost his mother to breast cancer and he doesn't want to lose his father. He doesn't want to lose anyone else's family. So I respect that. And I was telling my guys in the office here, like, I don't want to hear it. I know there's going to be scouts who are like, oh, he quit on his team. I'm going to shut that down so fast if anybody says that to me because it's just not fair, to be 20 or 21 years old. And not only do you have to worry about keeping your family and yourself safe, but you're worried about the financial future of your family, your parents, your future children. So I commend Caleb Farley for making a horrible, hell of a decision that a kid to have to make. Now, I do think he's a great corner. I have an article coming out Friday morning about him. I think he's the best corner in this class, 6'2", 207. He was clocked at over 24 miles per hour on GPS. To give you some context, Tyreek Hill was clocked at 22.6. So that's moving. I'd like to see that GPS tracker to make sure it was working because that's pretty fast. But he's also, playmaker. He had 4 picks last year. I think 12 passes defense. And to be 6'2", 207, like, last year with Jeff Okudah and CJ Henderson, there was that argument of like, can Okudah play in man? We don't know if he's fast enough. But at 6'2", 207, if you're legitimately running, 24 miles an hour, you can do everything. You are Jalen Ramsey. You're Patrick Peterson at that level. So it would have been great to see another year in the ACC, but go watch him, against all those receivers in the ACC last year. You got plenty of film to evaluate. So I would think right now he's going to be a top 15 or 20 pick.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you. He's actually the CB1 on our big board, our ninth overall prospect. So we think very highly as well. And another name that I think falls into that same bucket in a sense is Travis Etienne, the running back from Clemson. And I know Clemson has a really good shot of returning to the national championship, but we know with these running backs, man, their shelf life, a lot of them really aren't seeing that second contract. And if they do, they're not even making it halfway through it. So with ATN, I think he has a serious decision to make. And I don't want to spread any rumors or anything like that, but I think he's a very interesting case just because of the position that he plays. I think he's a little bit different than some of these other top ranked guys just because with the quarterback, like Trevor Lawrence is different. Everybody knows that he has a really good shot of being the number 1 overall pick. And then like Micah Parsons, he plays a really important position. But running backs, man, I mean, I always say you can find them at the local gas station nowadays. That's how
if you're if you're Kylan Hill or Chuba Hubbard, Najee Harris, those guys that all went back to school, you have to be looking around, especially like Chuba with what went down with Mike Gundy. I would be, and I'm not trying to tell him what to do, and I'm not trying to start rumors. If I were Chuba, I would be booking a ticket already, man. I would be so far out of there. Kylan Hill, appreciate Kylan, respect what he did, getting a movement going in Mississippi that needed to happen, and I think he can be very proud of that. If that's your calling card, if that's the last thing you did at Mississippi State, it might be the best thing you ever do there, to get that flag change. So those are 2 guys where, and I have players ask for advice all the time. Those 2 have not asked me about this. If they did, I would tell them, I think your work's done in college. Go ahead and get ready for the NFL.
All right. Save your legs, man. Those running backs, especially with the short shelf life. But I want to open up the floor to you now. I know you probably have some upcoming articles. I know you alluded to the one about Friday, and then I'm sure you have some other stuff that's going on at BR. So I want to open up the floor to you to just tell everybody where they can find you on Twitter, or if you have some upcoming stuff in the works.
Yeah, I appreciate that. On Twitter at NFL Draft Scout, or on all social media, I think on at NFL Draft Scout. Stick to Football, my podcast with Connor Rogers and Mello. It returns August 4th, 2 times a week. We're excited. We do longer shows, less ads, just more football. Back to our roots a little bit after some experimenting last year, so that's going to be a good time. We do a tailgate tour every fall that is probably canceled thanks to the
Yeah.
pandemic. So going to be at home more, which I'm excited about. More time for writing, more time for evaluating. I feel like last year, I'm blessed to be in this spot, but last year they had us running all over the country doing stuff, and that really put me behind the ball on some evaluating. So it'd be good to just be home, being safe, wearing my mask, washing my hands, and watching players 7 days a week. So articles will be out. I believe my schedule ramps back up fairly soon to where the Scouting Notebook will come out every Friday again. And then my first mock draft drops September 7th, so Labor Day Monday. People can look for that first mock. But just trying to keep up with you guys, man. Y'all are killing it. And I love that. There's a great camaraderie, but the little bit of competition always helps. I got to stay on my toes.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. That's the best thing. You're one of my best friends in the industry, and it's a pleasure having you on here, man.
Likewise.
Thank you for Jordan. Thank you for joining the Reid Option Podcast. I appreciate it, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Have to have you on ours. Do a little home and home here.
Just let me know, man. I'd love to come on.
All right. Thanks, man.